everybody, and welcome back to Pass the Pilot episode 9 with Johnny McFadden and myself, Stefan. Today, Johnny and I want to talk about context layer to give the people an idea. So when you give your agent some documents, for example, or you ask your agent to do research for you, or you ask your agent to tap into your repository of sorts, and you ask it to find specific information. That's what we call the context layer. And what is so important is it is because it's basically it's the working files that your agent will be using in order to extract information, in order to infer maybe a decision, or maybe to infer an information from that. And so it's really important that your context layer is as accurate and as current and also appropriately scoped. Because in an enterprise environment, if you don't get that context layer right, if your agent has the wrong information, just like any person, giving them the wrong information, it will come to the wrong conclusions. It will make the wrong decisions. And this is something we want to shed some light on today. We want to talk about I guess, the hurdles, the problems with the context layer, how sort of naive or simple ways of doing it will work in certain basic scenarios, but as soon as you go to a broader application of your data storage, of your knowledge base, whatever you have, you're going to run into real problems because the agent will just create bad output.
Yeah,
And
I think you
Johnny,
should create
yeah,
create bad output, right? It will essentially hallucinate, the dreaded hallucination. I mean, that
yeah,
happens when these AI models or these agents don't have the correct answer. They'll just guess.
enough context, right?
Yeah,
Or they don't. To your point, it doesn't have it doesn't have the answer. It will hallucinate it.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. And I think that's a common misunderstanding. Is I because again, I always think of an example of if you're asking an agent, how many vacation days do I get in a year, right? And it doesn't have
mhm.
access to that content, it's going to make something up. If,
Yeah,
however, you pass it your HR policy and then ask that question, it's
right.
it's going to always get it right because it's right there. The information's right at its fingertips. Yeah.
Correct. However, still your HR policy is probably still multiple pages and there's different versions and stuff. So how does it identify the right HR policy, or the right part of the HR policy that says like, oh, you live in the state of California, right? So here's the part that applies to you. So contextuality comes with many different facets. And actually, it is actually a, sort of a a huge problem out there that many AIs in the enterprise environment fail because of this poor context quality. So today, I think we want to talk about the core insight that we have identified, which really leads to the way that Vertesia is handling the context layer, and that is why documents are really the source of truth, and how most current approaches of document abstraction, when you upload them into a system, for example, and you create like a database entry for the documents in order to find them easier, or you have maybe just a full text search at your disposal, how that is just not making the cut when it comes to helping your agent to identify the right pieces of information in the right context in order to make the right decision and present the right information.
Yeah.
So there are these really critical blockers that block the enterprise AI adoption because, to your point, people will see it hallucinating, will not trust the information, and especially when we talk about in our previous episodes, Johnny, we talk about agentic AI and autonomous agents, right? Or we talk about workflows where there's like agentic supervision. If that is flawed because the context is dirty or the context is wrong, you run into way different problems. And this is where you wouldn't be able to trust your agentic framework. So the context layer is really the most important piece. Um, I also think we want to shed some light, a little bit of a peek behind the curtain of how Vertesia is solving this problem of managing the context layer and making sure that all the requirements are really taken into account. Because there's also things like governance. How do you deal with not just different document types, but different content types? How do you deal with images?
Large documents, right, that are outside the context window of a model, things like that.
Right, large
Videos.
documents.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, unstructured documents basically, right? Or you have a PDF that has charts, right? Or a PDF that has images, or all sorts of different things that with traditional um, agentic systems you will run into problems because they cannot parse that information. And this is really what Vertesia platform does. It's created the framework that prepares everything, the semantic doc preparation that Vertesia is doing, that then allows the agent to be fed with the best possible format for the information. So let's jump into this a bit. So look at these fancy here, forth and back next to it. So
I think it's worth calling out that what we're looking at was
yeah.
created by an agent.
Yes. Oh yeah. Oh yes. Absolutely. So all of this is basically based in a number of different things. It's a digest of an interview that I had with our CEO Eric. And it's also tapping into the agentic knowledge of the Vertesia platform itself. So how is it working? All of the diagrams and stuff we're showing you today here is really based in the agent knowing or Vertesia knowing about its own making. So it can perfectly explain what it's doing in the background and visualize that for us. Yeah, so the first was really a statement that I picked up from Eric. And it comes down to that when you have a set of documents in your file folder structure, you might have an index of that, right? Or you might be searching, of doing a full text search. But this sort of level of abstraction that you do there when you upload it into Salesforce, for example, or into a Workfront or whatever that is, then you probably will have some high level abstraction in the form of metadata about that document, right? But that will not be enough for an agent to make a decision. Back to your example of the HR policy, right? It's only one piece of the HR policy that you're interested in. So that will not be in your abstraction. However, there are thousands of documents that the agent will have to analyze in order to come to a conclusion what's the best answer for Johnny, who is living in the state of Arizona, for example, right? Versus someone who might be living elsewhere. So these are the nuances. So, or when you talk about contracts, right, you will have a contract database. But in the end, what is the auditability and what the liability is really counting against is the truth that stands in your document, right? Versus just like maybe a database structure that you have somewhere. And that brings a whole problem with it, Johnny, right? How do you abstract all of these documents? How do you make this level of detail available to the agent without having to read it all times and again?
Yeah.
Because that would take weeks, even with nowadays technology, right?
Yeah, weeks, and I think there's a couple different ways companies can try and do that. They can pass everything every time, which is not going to work for a number of
Oh,
reasons, context window being one. And then another approach a lot of people still try to take is training their own custom model, which
yeah,
isn't a great solution because the cutoff date is when you end training, right? So are you going to train that model every year to be up to date on the
yeah,
most recent information, right? So there's a lot of problems. Um, that I think companies run into with kind of traditional methods of trying to tackle this problem.
yeah,
Um, and I like the bottom says context window as a scarce resource, right? I think that kind of hits the nail on the head is
yeah.
agents and models can only take in so much context at once, and how do you control what is being shown and when?
And how do you control what goes in, right?
Yeah.
So this is one of the nice things I did here. And again, this is all agentically built. So this whole presentation HTML file here was built, and I asked it to visualize certain things. So that fundamental shift of like, hey, how do I need to reprocess and pre-process my documents that I might have so far only on the file server? And not just saying like, hey, yes, sure, my LLM can now search the file server or search the database and hopefully find the right information. It really comes down to how do you pre-process everything. So the reality is that you need to have the specific contextually aware agent that can find that information. And really, the way that you would do that is that you need to and it's here in the very first step, it's really define that world, right? So how does the agent make sure it understands the context? And that's not just enough to have a structured summary of something, right? When you read a book, you want to find the information. Yes, you need to know where to look, and that might be standing in the index as a chapter, or it might be in a chapter, but the chapter doesn't tell you what the information really is. That's buried somewhere inside. On the other hand, you need, in order to work with a long-term memory, you need a structure. And that structure, and there's various ways out there. Google has a new way of doing it. It's called, I think, OKF, the Open Knowledge Format, which allows you to build like a semantic structure in order to store information, similar to a way that we are all used to folder structures, right? But it's going a little bit deeper into that, into how it is structuring information. But it basically gives the agent a way to follow that structure, follow that hierarchy, that hierarchical information finding, and combine that with identifying the detail in the document. So Johnny, how would you put that? Because we're creating multiple layers of document meta structure in a way.
I think metastructure is a good word. Hierarchy might be another good way to look at it. I think the agent being able to have different ways of searching for things
Hmm.
is kind of how I think about it, where there's the agent is it's gonna if it's looking for something, right, in a content store like in Vertesia agents have a lot of different ways they can search for stuff, and they can basically choose dynamically at runtime how
Yeah.
they're going to search. And they can search by the title, they can search for the full text, they can do a semantic vector search, right,
Hmm.
on the metadata or on the full text. So I
Yep.
think there's all these different options that are made available to our agents that kind of start with like uh,
They start with this here, right? They start
yeah,
with really, and
yeah.
we're going to get into these different layers. We're going to, as I said, we're going to give a sneak peek behind the curtain of what these different layers consist of. But this is what it comes down to. Give your agent the ability to find data in a structured way, have it accessible, and then dig deeper where it needs to investigate and really scale that economically, right? Because in the end, and this is what step three here is showing, like your agent decisions are based on the context layer, right? So, and if you put bad information or incomplete information or maybe duplicative information into the context window, that drives up your cost, drives up the time it takes the agents to do the job, and in worst case scenario, you get bad output. And this is what it comes to when we go into step four, where now you need to engineer the context in a way. Johnny, what does that mean from your point of view?
Yeah, so I think the best example I can think of here is when you're dealing with a really large document. This was something that I remember running into a while ago. And when we were still working on a solution, and basically what happens is the agent has a huge document and it's looking for, a very small piece of information. And the document a lot of times might be too big for the agent's or the model's context window. Or it's going to take up 70% of it, right? Limiting what the agent can do afterwards. And so I think engineering the context is doing something like giving each document some sort of table of contents, right? And letting the agent say, okay, I'm looking for legal information. I'm looking at the table of contents for this document. Okay, legal information is between page 40 and page 50, and then
Mhm.
grabbing that small subset.
Yeah,
Um, I think that's one really good example and something that I see used a lot in my daily work where
yeah.
there's because again, we're not just talking about one huge document. We could be talking about 100 huge documents,
Let's
right?
say
And
100,000 documents
yeah,
that all have something about legal in them. How do you
yeah,
find your path to that? And then engineer that context that is the right size, the right scope, the right content for your agent to come back and provide an answer.
yeah. And I think even just the metadata that we
Yeah,
extract,
yeah,
and the ability for us to be flexible on what that metadata looks like. Because again, if you're searching through 100,000 documents, right, it's going to depend on the context of what the company does and what their
yeah,
documents look like, and being able to control what the metadata schema and the structure looks like and the different types and classifications. It all plays a really big role in how well these agents are ultimately going to work and to find the right information, right? And so I
yeah,
think this really it comes down to scale, right? If you're talking about uploading a 5-page document to a chatbot, right? That's not a problem. But then when you're talking about at an enterprise level, hundreds of thousands, millions of documents or more, that's where this stuff becomes really, really important. It's really make or break use
yeah,
case.
yeah. So let's take a little bit a look at these challenges and these issues that exist when you are engineering your context layer, right? So the first one is we talked about it already that the truth is actually locked into these unstructured documents, which people have signed contracts, they have pictures, they have PDFs, they have design guidelines, they have whatever it is, Excels. But it's all basically unstructured, and you require your agent to understand all of that in a way and do that within a finger snap. So I want to exemplify a little bit here, just high level, basically what these problems or what can go wrong, right? So you might have agreements, you might have different document types, image formats, and so on. But if you don't have the right way to pre-process this, the agent will just have a very simplistic view of that. So, for example, character-based text splitting destroys semantic boundaries. What does that mean? So on the left-hand side here, we see an Acme Corp document that was given to an agent, right? In a normal scenario, if you don't have like some advanced processing tools, you might have just a regular text extraction, which is what many in the beginning you might remember OCR. What OCR is doing, it's identifying things on a scanned document and it will just read out one long string of text, right? Yes, when you do a full text search, you might be able to find an exact term in there. But again, this won't help you when you need to find a piece of information and you might not even know the right terminology, right? So it's not semantic. It doesn't have a broader context. It doesn't have a meaning. It's just a string of regular text that got extracted without form. And form, as we see here, this is beautiful actually showing that if you don't retain the form is not just there to make it more easily readable, but also it's breaking things into information pieces and priorities in a way. The problem becomes even worse. And Johnny, I think we talked about this previously when you are using retrieval augmented generation. This is really these RAG repositories, these vector databases, these embeddings where the basic technology basically means you turn words into numbers and you break them down into vectors. But really, what it's doing here in order to identify these things more easily, it's chunking the text and chunking the text just by standard means of how a repository would do it is it's breaking the regular text extraction into more chunks. And that means when you compare to what we have on the left here, it would mean that, for example, the customer is partially in chunk one. So the people who are or the parties agreeing to this license or service agreement here. So you would have the the customer in chunk one and the service provider in chunk two, or maybe even worse, it's broken the middle of the address, right? And the agent is now searching that repository and it's returned only with chunk one or chunk two, or maybe both. And this is really breaking the idea of like being specific about what piece of information you're looking for, who are the contract parties. It's showing beautifully here how this is just broken into pieces. And this is exactly the point where you say like who are the parties of this contract? The agent might just give you one or both or none, right? Because it doesn't understand.
Yeah, or it might just see an address, right, and pull the
Yeah,
address.
yeah,
If it's not if that's not chunked together, where Acme Core is 1, 2, 3, 4 Main Street, and then the next chunk is service provider with their address.
yeah,
Maybe Acme Core is part of the a chunk above, and now there's Acme Core's address, and then that gets lumped in with the service provider's name, right? And now there's all this confusion. And I think
yeah.
that's what we see when we don't do semantic chunking, like with Vertesia, where these arbitrary cutoffs based on pages or based on
Page or
text limit.
character count, or maybe the database cannot do more than 500 characters at a time, or
Yeah,
right.
yeah, it
That's
causes all sorts of problems. Yeah.
all sorts of problems, right? And this happens in the background. You typically don't get to see that. It's just like you upload a document into, let's say, Google or GPT, whatever. They're chunking this information in the background. You don't know, right? Depending on what model you've chosen, what provider you've chosen, this is all a black box to you. You just fire and forget and hope it works, right? Yeah. So another example is, of course, when you have tables, right? Or you have like charts. Let's take a look what happens at a chart. So you would have the regular text extraction that totally ignores images and charts. So maybe if you're lucky, the OCR component can read some of the textual components here. But again, it's basically bringing it down into one text string, right? That's completely deprived of any information that really would make it easy to build it back together into something the agent can interpret and explain to you, right? Because now it's simply some cells. So, or when the document structure is lost, and that's also what we saw with the previous example.
Mhm.
Um, it's especially when you just break it down per page or you break it down per character count, that doesn't work. So Vertesia has a number of ways to address that, and don't want to get into all of them here today. But basically, one thing that we do is we create document types, and document types are really um, created for different documents that you would upload into the platform, Johnny. Can you elaborate a little bit of what content types are?
Yeah, content types are a way to classify the documents. So if you think about right, a company's collection of documents they might have, they're going to have a ton. They're going to have invoices. They're going to have promotional videos for marketing. They're going to have HR videos for internal stuff. They're going to have contracts. They're going to have emails, right? And all of this can't be treated the same, right? If I mean, just think about a person searching for something, let alone an agent, right? If you can categorize stuff, if I know I need to find an invoice and there's no way to distinguish between invoices and contracts and videos,
Yeah.
it's going to take me exponentially longer to find what I'm looking for. And the same is true with an agent, right? It's a way to classify the documents or the content, and I also think it's a way to extract meaningful information from those documents in the metadata.
Yes. That's what the object schema here does, right? So on the
Yep.
left-hand side, there's a number of different document types just to exemplify. But on the right-hand side, we see the content types object schema for the content type video analysis. So that's basically when somebody uploads a video. And really, to your point, it is not just giving us a schema to fill in, but also each of these attributes here, the agent can be given instructions of what that actually means.
Hmm.
So, what do I want you to extract for the personal impressions? How do I envision you to write the scene description? In what format do I want to have the dialogues? So these are behind each of these schema points here is it can be a definition to it's like a mini prompt, right? Each of these here can be a mini prompt in itself, and the agent is gonna handle the document and the abstraction or the extraction of information from the document by the sort of mini prompt it gets from the schema. But Johnny, correct me if I'm wrong. I think you might be saying like, oh, but now I have to set up all these schemas for every document type that I have, right? So that would be a painful task, no?
It would be, yeah, and it's the way a lot of people still do it. So with Vertesia, you absolutely have that option. If you want to build the schema from scratch, you can. I don't do it that way. Most people that use Vertesia don't do it that way. There's a couple different ways you can just, if you take any document or 10 different documents and you upload them to the system, Vertesia is intelligent enough to understand what each document represents, and it will actually create a metadata schema for
Yes.
you on the spot and automatically classify everything. So if you upload an invoice, it's going to come back with a metadata schema of,
Yeah.
account name, account number, total, tax, right, line items, everything
Yeah.
that's in that document.
What I'm super excited about is our latest feature. It is really about it's not just doing it once, right? But let's say you are in a ECM digital asset management scenario where so far librarians have manually updated all the schemas, and then the poor souls had to fill out with every document upload, had to fill that out. I guess that's a thing of the past by now. But you would have to still review and update the schema, right? And now we're talking about agentic access to this, right? You as a person trying to infer what would be good for the agent to know that just doesn't work like that anymore. You want the agent to do that inference of the schema by itself. But now new documents come in or additional attributes are required for the schema. Our latest version of this is actually sort of an agentic schema librarian that understands all of the different document types we have so far. And as new documents come into your project, it will then infer if it needs to create new ones, if it will update existing ones, if it will change existing ones. And Johnny, this goes really into the direction that I'm so excited about, where I believe that the digital asset management is dead. I think it needs to be handed over into agentic autonomous services that will be handling the asset management itself. I think the management component is what will become autonomous very, very quickly. Vertigo is one of the at the forefront of that. And this is really sort of a custodian, a data guardian for your schema, doing it and managing the schema as it sees need of new document streams, of new content types, sort of influx
Yeah,
into your asset management.
yeah, I did a really cool. I showed a customer a really cool demo the other day where we did exactly what you're talking about. I showed an example of there's an existing metadata schema. You now have a bunch of other documents that don't really fit into any of those schemas, and you kind of want to reorganize how the metadata looks like at a high level, or what the metadata looks like at a high level. And I used an agent, and I said, analyze the different types of documents in the content store, not just documents, but images, videos, and give me some different options on how we can organize this from a metadata schema. And it created a
Wow.
report with all these different options, right? It was like you could go really, really broad and have three metadata schemas for everything, or you could be really narrow. And it gave me all these options. And then if I wanted to implement any of them, all I said was, yeah, option B looks good. Go ahead and implement
Yeah.
that. And it's going to
Yeah.
recreate the metadata schema,
Yeah.
re-extract all the information. And I think that gives you something that you just couldn't do before. I mean, it's hard enough to get people to manually fill in metadata, let
Yeah.
alone thinking about changing metadata schemas and starting from
Oh
scratch.
my God.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's not going to happen, right? And I think,
It's not gonna happen. It's not
and there's a
gonna.
lot of good reasons to do it. It's just people aren't going to do that. They're just,
Yeah.
it's not really within like uh, human capability to do that much work without
Yeah.
just losing your mind of boredom.
And or another scenario, you are in a dam migration from A to because every few years people have the tendency to change dam because now they've been promised the Holy Grail again, yet by another vendor doing the same thing, but it's more has a more beautiful interface, so everything migrates over. Or you come from a number of different dams and consolidate it all into the new platform of choice, your ECM, whatever that is. The problem is that you have all these different schemas that need to get harmonized across your bazillions of objects and data sets, right? So this explains and this shows actually what Vertesia is capable of doing by analyzing all of these different data sets and harmonizing them agentically, automatically, in order to lead to one harmonized structure that can then self-manage itself in your future dam where you are. And this can be independent of the whatever dam you choose. Vertesia can read and or write into dams. So Vertesia can be an ECM in itself, managing all that schema, but it can also enrich existing schemas in other solutions. So I think that makes it incredibly powerful, just as we're showing this here. Okay, back to the source of truth of documents. I think structure preservation is also really important, and this is just another example of that, where yes, the document on the left had a certain structure, and as we talked about, it's not just extracting the text as a one-liner, but really retaining the structure and then being able to infer the metadata structure based on that. For the agent to have a very rich sort of hierarchical approach of finding information inside a document and then pulling out, maybe via vector search, the specific piece that's needed. All right, let's move on to the second issue. Garbage in, garbage out. This is what it comes down to, right? This is why 76% of enterprise AI projects fail because, yes, great, we have the latest GPT, but we still don't know how to process 10,000 documents with it. Or the just the mere unstructured sort of nature of the content. There's no way to manage that. And great, you have a Gemini personal work account. Guess what? After 20 documents, it's going to say, yep, that's enough. I mean, now with latest versions, of course, you have things like integration to your Google Drive, but still under the hood, there's still some very stark limitations on what you can do with it. And also, it's more, these are not enterprise tools yet, really. They are still focusing on your individual interaction with an agent rather than doing that at enterprise scale. So we talked about a little bit the character-based splitting, for example, or tables that get lost, Johnny, right? And I have another chart for us here that explains a little bit what RAG really does when this chunking happens, just to exemplify that a little bit, building upon what we talked about before. So you have that document, right? And then it's gonna chunk this information, and there will be overlaps between these different chunks, right? And then you will ask your agent to do a query to retrieve information from that, and you will get different pieces of information of text blocks basically that all then go into the agent context window. And this is where we're now closing the loop on the context layer management, which is what we're talking about today, because it's like I'm giving you different pages from a book and ask you to tell the story, right? And,
It's a really good
it,
analogy. Yeah.
the agent will be confused. And back to the hallucination, Johnny, that you mentioned,
Yep.
right? This is where the agent's going to make shit up. Excuse my
Yep.
French, right? It's gonna hallucinate. It's gonna find. It's gonna somehow try to make sense of it just to please you. Talked again about agentic bias, one of our previous episodes, where agents just go rogue, and people have a hard time understanding why that happens. So just exemplify that here in an image. So, however, with Vertesia, and we started tapping into it, Johnny, is we do what's called we call it semantic doc preparation. It's a multi-stage enrichment pipeline. I think that describes it very well. It is schema aware. It's not just chunking, but it understands the topology of the document itself. It knows where there are boundaries between topics within the document, for example. And Johnny, you hinted at it already, and we're going to dive into it a little bit later. It's we have multiple indexes that the agent taps into when it's searching for information. So it's
Yep.
not just the full text, it's not just the vector, it's not just properties. It's a combination of things that the agent can tap into in order to find uh, information. So garbage in, garbage out. I think that's pretty clear. Let's talk a little bit about um, multimodal content, right? And I think this is one of the key differentiators here. You look at a PDF document, and Johnny, you talked about it here earlier. So it's a financial report or a strategic document of sorts. It will have different components to it, right? It will have a certain, first of all, it will have a certain layout. It will have probably tables, graphs, images, narrative. It will have maybe extensive spreadsheets, right? Maybe it's making references to other documents, right? A link to an enormous Excel file, giving you just the executive summary, but really to understand it, you would have to get into another file. So there's all these sort of layers that you can see when, or that you could analyze a document by, or that you would need to analyze a document for an agent to have a better understanding than just a text extraction. And these are some of the I just exemplify six here of the ways that currently we're doing it, that agents can do that. And the first one really is in this processing pipeline is a way to render the text, right? It's understanding basically the structure of the contextual components of your document. Johnny, how can I understand that when I now look at the sort of layout awareness? What would that do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to understanding or I guess understanding what we take for granted as humans reading stuff, right? We
Mhm.
see a title and that title, having something as a bold title means something to us. We don't think about it, right? We see,
Yep.
oh, this is the title. We know all the information that's smaller than that title typically
Yep.
relate to that title, right? And so we understand the hierarchy.
It
Um,
creates a title in our heads, right? This is the topic that we're talking. That's the
Yep.
title.
And
Yeah.
and any charts or images, right? You know, oh, that goes with that. Or if there's a description, figure
Mhm.
one, blah, 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 describing the chart in more detail, right? We understand that that relates to that image. Traditional ways of doing this text extraction fail miserably at that. I've used some tools myself before coming to Vertesia where it just takes everything as one big long string of text with no hierarchy. So the title is treated the same as the footer, the footnote,
Yeah.
right? That
Yeah.
doesn't really matter for 99% of the people reading that document. And I think that's the problem that a lot of places run into, and that's the problem that Vertesia solves with our semantic doc prep is maintaining that structure so that the agent can read this content the same way a human does and understand, okay,
Yeah.
this section's about finance and all this stuff underneath relates to finance. It's all one part, right? And then the
Yeah.
next part, I don't know,
And
compliance.
prioritize the information within finance, right? Because it's
Yep.
not just like, to your point, it's not just like the 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. It's not just a chronological order, right? There's also weight and importance that comes with that structure. So it's a context-aware structure that's being created as one of the streams when you upload a PDF document.
Yeah.
The second one is really now let's understand the layout a little bit more. Now it's not so much about the contextual weighting and the contextual structure of the text. Now it's about understanding the layout. Are there columns in here? Are there tables in here? It might be even the table might be an image, right? It's maybe it's not within a Word document how you can create a table doc object, right? Or you just copy and paste from Excel and paste an image into it. So
Yeah.
a really good a really good document pre-processing engine will understand that. Yeah, sure, give me a PDF. I understand that there is a table in there. I understand that there's a two-column layout, right? Which again is important to understanding for the analysis, right? To understand that sort of complex layout. And when we say recovery, it really means recovery in terms of this discoverability for the agent and understanding it. So that's the second layer. Um, I think the third layer is really interesting, Johnny. What are we looking at here?
You tell me stuff. I don't know.
Okay, I didn't prepare you. I didn't prepare you. I'm sorry. So this one is really about now identifying objects or shapes, right? So when you think about it, you create a PowerPoint chart, you create a flow chart in there. This is exactly what this layer is pointing at, right? It identifies the relationship between objects in an image, and it also identifies how these image features, like the box that has a text underneath, relates to another maybe arrow element and then another square, which might stand for a decision in a workflow. And it's really making these contextual under relationships between things that it identifies in your on your page, basically in your document, and then it finds a way to embed that image and text data together. So it can, when you then come with a natural language, explain to me what this graph is showing. We are processing documents like that, right? So you give me a document that has a flow chart, and the agent will have an instruction to explain what that flow chart is. So it identifies it, it learns it, and it will then create a narrative, for example, of what the flow chart does, which will be super important for an LLM, which is all text-based, to understand what is the flow chart that you're talking about in your reference text, right? What does that process actually do? I had seen some incredible things where I took some really complex processes and I turned them into a description, or the other way around, right? You would take like a very complex process description and turn it into a flow chart. Actually, we're going to see some of that a little bit later in this year. So this is all about understanding objects and understanding how objects relate to context. Um, just going through here, the next one is a more an object detection in images, in photos, right? The where are they? Is there a geometric correction? Is there a perspective? Really understanding what that is. Many of these today's bigger LLMs like Gemini, GPT, you throw an image at them. These are image models, multimodal. Coming back to that, we're talking about multimodal context. But again, what it comes down to, when the Vertesia platform finds a document that has such an object, we are using these bigger already trained models in order to identify and create a captioning for these objects. So again, that goes into the context layer of describing at the meta level what is on page 3, what do we see there, as opposed to just like extracting the text or even identifying, yes, there's an image, but we identify what's in that image and how does it relate to the text. So that creates a very deep linkage between the content and the actual knowledge graph that Johnny keeps to referring to.
Yeah, we also, right, extract text from images. So if it's
Yes.
if it's an
Oh yeah.
image that is if it's a picture of
Yeah.
a page of a book,
Yeah.
we extract all of that text and make it usable
Yeah.
by the models.
Perfect, perfect handover into this one here. So this is, we take an image and we, of course, we're not training models to do that, right? We're using the big foundational models to do that, but it's the way that you apply those outputs in not just putting it all into one prompt and hoping it's gonna help you with that, but it's a structured decomposition of the documents, a structured analysis of these documents in order to reach that cross-modal search and querying features that Johnny has been talking about, where we're searching an index, a vector, and a full text at the same time, and are able to guide the agent with a structured metadata hierarchical schema approach to identify the right information. Yeah, I don't want to, just the last one here. I know this is kind of very technical, but it helps to understand how the different layers need to be dissected in order to create that validated context layer input again that we're talking about. Same is true when we talk about Excel files, right? I can just upload an Excel and look at the rows and look at the columns, and hopefully an LLM is going to find the right column. But this is really that you need to prepare the data as an intermediate data model. And Johnny, I know you've been playing with our databases a little bit, so what can
Yeah,
you tell
yeah,
us?
I think that it's this is interesting on a number of levels. The Excel is a good example, right? If you have a huge Excel document, um, you don't want the agent to load the entire thing, right? It needs to understand what's even in that Excel document first. And so with Vertesia, we have a really clever way of handling that where we basically provide a summary of what's in that Excel document with the different columns and sheets. And that way, when an agent's looking for something or doing an analysis, it can understand, do I even need to open this? Like, does this have the information I'm looking for? Um, and then, so that was, I don't know, time moves so fast in the AI world. That was, right. But we didn't always have databases. That was a couple of releases ago that we implemented databases. And now, instead of just working with Excel files, we have the ability to create databases, create
Yes,
multiple
we suck
tables
it
in a
in, right?
database schema, load Excel files. So I, for example, was given a use case recently where basically I was given a bunch of files. The client didn't really know what was in, they knew what were in the files, but not in any great detail. Um, and they gave me the files, and I basically, what I did was I uploaded it to Vertesia, and I asked an agent, explain what I'm looking at here. What type of data
Yep.
is this? Are there any
Yeah.
connections? It did a complete analysis over, I think it was like 12 to 15 files, Excel files, really
Wow.
complex, hundreds of thousands of rows, millions of rows in one file. And it created an entire database schema and loaded it all
Yep.
to a database. And then it
Yep.
visually showed me the connections, the foreign keys. Oh, the
Yep.
account ID in this file goes to the, account number in this file, right? And it did all of it in, I mean, no time at all. I mean, a couple of minutes. And it's amazing how much more efficient these
Yeah.
agents are at doing this type of work, right? Because if you think
Yeah.
about a person doing that, they have to open all these Excel files. They have to, I mean, I used to do this type of stuff, right? You open the Excel files, you're like jotting down notes of what's in each Excel file. You're trying to like find the columns that match. And that's
Hmm.
all just the first step of just trying to understand the data
Yeah.
set, let
Just
alone
abstracting
trying to
that
load it.
into and then understanding also what is the nature of the content I'm looking at? What are the different Excels that have been given to me? How do they interrelate? And how do I find interesting data points in there by, for example, adding up every row and finding the sum, or doing a cross correlation, right? Correlating two data lines, finding that. So all of these things you would have to do manually after you would understand, first of all, what is the nature of this? What do these column headers mean in a financial context, in a marketing context, in a scientific context, right? And this is just insane, Johnny. When we got this, when we not only had the sort of Excel input, but now suddenly an agent will look at the Excel and start building a database and schema, to your point.
Well, you
And
bring up a
and it will also create the formulas that help it to analyze it by itself.
you bring up a good point too of the understanding of the data because if you were to give me a data set, let's say from, I don't know, like some biology research project, right?
Mhm.
I don't
Mhm.
know much about biology. I took biology my freshman year of high school 20 years ago, right?
Mhm.
So I'm going to be a lot of those concepts and what the data is going to be completely foreign to me. I probably won't even understand what some of the column names are, let alone what the data set is actually showing. And I think it's important to remember these large language models and these reasoning models that power these agents we use, they have all that context. They've been trained on all that data. So they are essentially an expert in every
It's in
subject,
their
right? So they
DNA, so to
understand what
speak.
the data is. Yeah. Which is it just makes it makes them even better at these sorts of tasks because you don't
Eh,
have to be an
Yes.
expert to use the
And,
data.
and here again, we are using Vertesia is using an LLM, a foundational LLM, in order to explain what the data is and then make inferences and create the code that will analyze all of this, right? But it's really the Vertesia framework that is bringing in all the different components, the constituents of all of this framework of this data pre-processing pipeline that then creates the context layer management, all of this is part of the bigger picture, right? So this is incredibly powerful in itself, but it's all baked into the moment you upload the document, right? You
Yep.
drag and drop, and that's all you do, and
It's
that's the magic.
also not exclusive, meaning if you have use cases that have unstructured content and documents and also structured data, all that's already pre-integrated in the Vertesia platform. So there are a lot of use cases where you have a database with structured data
Yeah.
and the agent needs to understand that, but it also needs to understand, 100-page annual report, right? It also needs to be able to search the web, right? And make use of all that information. So not to get off topic, but I didn't want anyone watching this to think that you can do content or databases. You can
Yeah.
do both.
Yeah, I think it's hard to get off topic with anything in this because everything is correlated in a way. For example, the next piece in all of this is when we now want to take a look and maybe shift gear a little bit into security and data governance. Do. I wrote a long article last time about yeah, the pros and cons of MCP, right? Which is like the model context protocol and allowing you to tap into different tools via sort of a simplified USB sort of connection for LLMs where they can now tap into a SQL database or your marketing database, your Salesforce, whatever that is. But really, if you don't do it in a proper enterprise way, the problem is going to be that you have your wife coming into the room while you're in the middle of a webinar recording, but she surely wants to get a big kiss because she's super cute. And I'm just going to cut it out. Meet Johnny.
Hi, Johnny.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Hi. How are you?
Good, how are you doing?
I'm going to Walmart.
Okay, you're going to Walmart. Yeah, we need coolant for our car. We're going on a big trip to Santa Fe. So I want to make sure we have coolant. Bye, baby. Yeah, security and governance really yeah, she got me off track now. Security governance, where you need to make sure that with MCP, you're now exposing so much more of your data to very, very powerful instruments, right? And you give an LLM suddenly all of your authority because you're logging in with your account ideally, or worst case scenario, a developer just gives you an API key, right? So now suddenly that LLM has full access to all the capabilities that this platform offers via MCP. So the entire article is about governance, but I want to talk about governance at the level before you are even using an MCP or any integration in the conversational interface or maybe in an agent. I want to talk about governance gaps actually when we talk about the pre-processing and the creation of the context layer, Johnny. So, did you come across any issues so far? Anything you can think of?
No.
So let me give you a head start to this. So when we process data, right, and we think about people and we think about how currently a file structure, for example, works, right? You will have different folder structures, and on every single folder, on every single file, you can set permissions, right? In a normal rec repository, that doesn't exist. Right? Everything is just one big bucket, and everyone just throws in their files. And this is how the repository works, because this is also what then the agent that is running against that file bucket, it has access to everything. There is no rhyme or reason how to structure that. So that's one huge problem. Also, there might be documents which might be of general interest, but there might be pieces of these documents which might be protected or not for everyone's eyes. So there might be confidential pieces inside documents. An agent doesn't know that. It will just the embedding process will just index it, and then it's available to everyone, right? So how is that supposed to work, right? Where you want the agent to work with your files and structures in a team environment even, or especially, or where you were servicing multiple clients, right? And now how does it differentiate? How does it know that Johnny is allowed to see something but Stefan is not? Because we're using the same agent. We're using the same LLM prompt in the background that was given to us. Maybe even in a GPT enterprise, right? Yeah, great. It has one document store. How does it know what Johnny is supposed to see and Stefan not? So that's a huge problem. And especially in the example here is GDPR, right? It's about personal identifiable information. It's about, yeah, where does Johnny live, right? What is his insurance number? What's his social number, right? All of that information that might be buried in a data set that might have some relevance to you, but you shouldn't be allowed to see it, right? So the agent cannot distinguish between these things, especially, and this is what we see here as gap number two, it will come to a leakage. Information will be leaking if you have no way to manage what the agent is seeing in the context of the user. Now the context layer needs to be broken down to the individual who is using it, right? Because the agent itself would have broad access, but Stefan is not allowed to see that. So the problem is that the agent in the end, again, will make decisions based on what is exposed. And if you have a leakage in your context, then the agent will take decisions based on that, right? Another example is simple things like content retention might not be enforced, right? I've I've seen companies basically sinking millions and millions of dollars into trying to come up with a content retention policy by classifying documents, by labeling them, and then say like, yeah, they will be deleted after 10 years. And guess what? They really pulled the plug, and everyone just went bananas because contracts of decades long global clients got deleted, right? And people just went bananas because IT in their need to do something about it because governmental enforcement was on the table, just did it because they had no way to deal with it. Now we're moving into agentic life, right? How do you do that? How does the agent know what the right version is to extract content from? Even without saying that we have have document retention, right? It cannot be enforced in a normal agentic way where you say like, hey, sure, here, LLM, work with my Google Drive. That has nothing to do with content retention, right?
Yep.
Or with protecting data, or with making sure that in a Teams drive, there's still certain things that the agent will not present to Johnny, right? Because Johnny is at another level of visibility, another classification for the documents, and now extrapolate that to a country border level where multinational teams are working with data. So just to scope the problem here a little bit.
Yeah, I think
And
I think it's I think it's I think you can kind of boil it down to the main problem, at least the way I'm thinking about it, is a user won't have access to a lot of data and information within a company. That user should also not have access to an agent that has that access level, right? So it's almost kind of like you wouldn't want a person being able to use an agent as a workaround
right.
to get access to information. Not that they would do it
Yes.
maliciously, but just
Yes.
doing a query and then the agent just
But
has.
let me ask, I fully
Yeah.
agree with you. So that would be like you're scoping the agent to the task. Makes
Mhm.
sense, right? But now we're working to a broader and broader application or reducing specificity of an agentic process, right? Because you're creating complexity by that, and you're creating like different scopes that different agents have access to. However, we need some intelligence here that allows an agent, just like somebody at a service desk, to identify, like, look up basically, this is Johnny. Johnny's allowed to see this, so I'm going to service and layer only that, right? Versus having to hard scope everything into folder structures, because there might still be things that are super relevant to Johnny, but his agent stays at a lower knowledge level and will not be able to work with that knowledge, right?
Yeah.
But you're right. Right now, this is what companies can do. They can scope the agents. However, at Vertesia, we're approaching it a little bit differently, and this is one of the latest things we can do. It's a new way of being able to not only control in first place the collection level access control. So it's not just a repository anymore, the bucket that we throw everything in, and then the agent has access to everything. No, the agent has access to things that live within my context. So Stefan's identity, Stefan's access permissions will be reflected in the way that of what documents does the agent have even access to. So that's number one. The agent cannot access something I don't have access to. Number two is then even if I have access to maybe might be a hidden data store where I cannot directly access via my file browser, right? But it's information that's accessible to my agent. So now we come to back to to close the gap again, back to the content preparation. We have all these attributes now, all these properties and schemas that we set. So we have document level sensitivity classification, and that might go down to the property level, right? Where we are masking certain elements of a document, such as an SSN, coming back to the GDPR example, or CCPA for California, where we are masking certain information that is even on the index. And the agent will understand because these property level masking, we call them ABAC, attribute-based access control, will basically tell that Johnny has a certain role that will give him access to certain components of the information or certain elements of that document, right? And therefore, the agent will be able to retrieve or not retrieve that information from a given document or from a database. Um, I think this is just a very strong concept because it allows you to expose certain parts of a document, making sure that other parts are still protected without having to take a left or right decision necessarily, replicating content, trying to manually structure content, trying to implement retention policies, and basically trying to separate the documents themselves. We start we start analyzing the content itself, and now we make the content and information accessible and role-based accessible in order to inform the context window that the agent can work with. Does it make sense, Johnny?
Yes, yes, it does make sense. Yeah, I think Vertesia's the way we approach security is awesome in my mind because I get asked a lot of questions by clients and prospective clients. Can we do this or that? And the answer is usually yes with our security because it can be so granular, right? It can be, oh, well, Johnny has access to these invoice documents, right, but not those, right, and vice versa. Um, and so I think it solves a really big problem that companies are starting to run into. Because again, I think a year ago people weren't super concerned about this because they were just starting to experiment. Where I think now AI use
Yeah.
cases are getting more real, right? People are
Yeah.
starting to actually implement stuff in production, and these are the
Yeah.
sorts of issues that they're running into. Is
Johnny uploads a document where there is really an SSN, a social security number on this document, and I'm in a group that's not allowed to see any SSN numbers, right? We're going to automatically block that document from your view, from my view, even though it might still be in the same collection, but the agent will not have access to it when I'm working
yeah,
with it because
yeah,
it is tagged as an SSN confidential, and Stefan has no access to that, right? And
yeah.
the agent will respect that. This is really becomes more and more of a governance issue. And again, referring again back to my article before about MCP and governance. This is where Vertesia has another extremely powerful and very unique way of managing enterprise level MCP and data connections. This is another piece to this puzzle. And this is why Vertesia has huge differentiation to all other sort of orchestration layer tools or pipeline management tools because we are building the enterprise level security and governance into the tool so that people can just build agentic frameworks and make sure that things are working operationally as they intend to, while we're taking care of all the underlying important security and compliance layers. Yeah, last but not least, Johnny, on this one, it's really tracking what the agent has been reading and doing inside the documents as well, versioning, right? So
Yep.
it's really who has seen what. The question is here, who has seen what part of what document, right? So this is what it comes down to. It's a very detailed way of giving that's level of auditability, which will become more and more important. I see, especially in bigger corporations, how the auditors must be going rogue right now, because there are no harnesses, no real frameworks, which is basically why so many projects are on hold or cannot be pulled through. Even though people might have a right approach, it cannot be put into the enterprise world because it's too insecure.
Yeah.
Okay, let's quickly touch on some topics. I mean, we're almost at time here. All of the things we've been showing to you today, Johnny, right? If somebody tried to do that all by themselves, yep, it's not just
That's a lot of work.
creating your LLM, right? It's not just your prompt. It's not just how you how you
Yeah, it's
how
not
you
just connecting to
right.
an API
Yeah,
or writing a prompt and connecting that to an API or getting a chatbot license of some sort and uploading, 10 documents.
yeah,
Those are all right. Can all be done, right? But it's not ready for
right.
production. Those types of things are not ready for production. It's not, I think it seems simple on the surface. It's like, oh, we just connect to one of the big providers' APIs and we're good to go. There's
Yeah.
a lot, a
Yeah,
lot more that goes on to that, right? At an enterprise level, or even a medium-sized organization level, right? Really any company that has, you know,
yeah.
hundreds
Let
to
me allow me to make a
thousands or
bold
more
statement.
documents.
Your
Yeah.
IT department cannot do this. And also, you might be buying into the big providers out there who promise you that they're going to do everything. But number one, they don't really understand your business because they don't take the time because you're just a license to them. And number two is they don't have this. They have the big models, they have the big LLMs, and they might have some of the components for sure about some of the data pre-processing, but bringing it all together into one coherent platform that allows you to do an enterprise deployment within a few days, checking all of the security and governance and infrastructure and pre-processing and everything at once. That is something that only the Vertesia platform can really provide from what we see on the market. And this is why it makes it so interesting because we're bringing all uh, the corporate requirements down to the point where it's actually auditable. It's not just like a point solution anymore, and that's why it's a comprehensive platform for enterprise content management as well as autonomous agentic orchestration. Okay, scale operations, that's basically what all of this is. How long will it take you to just build out part of such a complex pipeline? And speaking of that pipeline, I want to give like a high level overview. Now that we talked about all the problems, just the last 5 minutes, really talk a little bit about what that semantic doc preparation pipeline that feeds into your context window, right? The context layer management, what that really consists of. So when you upload the document, Johnny, it can come from a number of levels, right? So I believe we can do in HTTPS URL. What would that be?
Do you mean for ingesting content?
Yes, yes. Can you talk a little bit about the three different ingests we have?
Oh yeah. So yeah, the HTTPS URL, right? So that's going to be a content object that is in an existing object store. Um, One cool thing we can do is we can connect to your object store, and you actually don't have to move the binary content objects. Right? And so it's kind of like a migration in place, you can think of it as. And so
Mhm.
that's one way. The cloud storage is another way, right? We can store it on, as you can see, S3, GCS, or Azure Blob.
Right.
But so we can handle the cloud storage as well. And then the artifact file is, think of if the object cloud storage is right, the big repository, the artifact file is a very small personal workspace for an individual agent. Um, that still has all of the same enrichment that all the other content has, but it's stuff that the agent's going to use, I would say temporarily, right? If it's going to needs to create a Python script to do some sort
Yeah.
of analysis, or it needs
Yeah.
to create a JSON schema to store some information temporarily. It's almost like a short-term memory for
It's,
the
it, I think technically it lives like in a secure sandbox, right? There is only a session available for the session as you work with it, and will all get removed. So it's not stored in the object store. It's not stored on a server really. It's a micro environment, a sandbox that's dynamically spun up as needed, and it will also be taken down again once the session has
Yeah, and
completed.
it's something that a lot of technology I've worked with outside of Vertesia doesn't provide is the artifacts. A lot of companies will keep the artifacts that the agents are using basically like out of the view of the user. That doesn't mean that they're not happening, but Vertesia lets you see, oh, if this agent wrote a Python script, what was that Python script? And you can actually download that, right? Same thing with JSON schemas, with any temporary documents it creates. You get access to all of that.
Back to the black box that a
Yep.
Gemini, a GPT, even an Anthropic is, they don't show you what's going on behind the curtain. With Vertesia, you have full access and control over that. So, but now it gets really interesting because now we have the different input sources and we take them into what we call an intake workflow, right? So we now start identifying like what are we dealing with here? And there's like three different pipelines that we have. One is for PDF and document types. Another one is for image and visual types. And another one might be spreadsheet, or they might be a mix and merge of all of them, right? It's just like this is now by MIME type. We have a specific processing, but all of the tools that we talked about before in detail, like the VLM, the
Steph, are you there? Did I lose internet? Did you? Let me see. Oh, my keyboard not working.
interesting part comes up that we talked about in length previously, and this is like where we do the text extraction, where we classify those documents, where we create the schemas. And again, just bringing back to mind, like these schemas can be dynamically created, Johnny. This is still something where I just go nuts what that means for in an ECM environment where the schema is automatically managed and inferred by an agentic process rather than librarians having to do that, right? And then close the document and fill out the fields on the form. Ah, the property extraction, we talked about the chunking and segmentation really, right? How that works and how a traditional sort of rack chunking would work versus an advanced, more of like a hierarchical structured chunking that's topic aware and that's doing it, creating like this hierarchical approach to a document navigation. And then last but not least, right, the actual embeddings, the actual vectors, where words are broken into smaller pieces called tokens, and these tokens are basically like a number representation of a similarity score, or allowing to calculate a vector similarity, as it's called. And just very simply, that is really not want to become mathematical here, but it's a cosine similarity. It's basically think of a triangle. What's the angle of difference between two different values? And that means how closely related shoe and toe, or maybe the word foot are related. So that's basically what this really does. It's the angle of separation. Um, so we didn't get too much into the schema system actually, and I think that would be a little bit too much, but we have ways of doing schemas programmatically via API, SDK, agent created schemas. Johnny, you said we can create our own schemas as well, right? JSON schemas.
If you want to, you can. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I think it's also worth calling out stuff that just because a schema is created by the system or created by an agent, it doesn't mean you can't go in and edit it. So the way I will typically work with schemas is I'll use the system or an agent to create the metadata schema, and then I go in and I edit it. I remove anything I think is unnecessary, or I'll add anything that I think needs to be added. But it's not an either or, it's an and. It's work with the platform, but also has still have full control as if you had built it manually.
Yeah. So different ways of creating those schemas, managing those schemas. And you see how the schemas here, this what we're showing here, how they actually feed back into the stages, into the inference, into the property extraction. So all of this is really an interrelated multi-step pipeline process. And remember, all this is just one document that we're looking at here. So all of that's happening in the background. And then the actual indexes, once all of that has been processed, we build the actual indexes for the vector space, like a pine cone. You could think of, just to give some names here to give people a reference. Elasticsearch is something we deploy, but also as a more structured property index. And then the actual document store, right, which is also extremely powerful, MongoDB or DuckDB for tables. And then downstream applications, right? As you build them on the Vertesia platform, you would have your AI agents, you would have your semantic search, you would have your analytics, you would have your automations. We have event bus system, which is another topic, Johnny, I would like to tap into again a little bit more
Yeah.
deep than one of the coming episodes. And all of that really brings us to how Vertesia platform, to maybe close it out for today, uh, brings us into a situation where we can work with any production use case out there, with any industry. It might be finance, it might be legal, where each and every one has a very specific need on how to work and how to structure their documents and processes. But because of the flexibility of the Vertesia platform, by means of managing and controlling the context layer and doing that all in a governance approved way and auditable way, it's just making it so incredibly powerful to create solutions for marketing, where we deal with assets in dams, where we have clients that live in the finance space that need to run huge audits across invoices that they get, for example. And Johnny, this is one thing I didn't show this time, but next time I want to show our new object identification and processing for like advanced OCR, right?
Oh yeah,
OCR
is
is
that
the
with the coordinates and the extraction that gets
Oh
shown?
my God,
It's awesome.
just incredible.
Yeah.
We're gonna talk about this in one of the coming episodes. Yeah, so this was episode number 9. Johnny, thank you very,
Yes.
very much for your time. I think we went a little bit over this time, but surely a very exciting topic. Thank you very much, and see you next time. And don't hit stop, because I need to record the opening. We did
Okay.
it! We did it! We did it! Okay, here comes the opening.
We get some water too.